Today's video is going to be a step-by-step tutorial on how I make liquid IMO or compost tea, the Korean natural farming way. So the foundation of a good compost tea is obviously having a good compost. In Korean natural farming, we use something we call indigenous microorganisms. Now this is gathered and cultured on a substrate that the fungus that we're looking for in particular love to eat. And what I have here is what we call IMO 4. So it's the fourth rendition of the original culture that we went out and gathered, typically in a forest or a prairie type setting. Compost tea, or even vermicompost tea, the reason we brew it and we want to put it on our gardens or our pastures or our row crops is because it introduces all of the beneficial microbes that we're looking for whenever we're growing plants. Ultimately, we want healthy soil, right? We're brewing an aerated compost tea in water where all of these microbiology are going to propagate. They're going to reproduce. We're going to give them some food, also called a catalyst, to help them grow, and they will multiply exponentially. And then in the liquid form, it's going to be easy to broadcast on our plants or on our pasture or cropland or whatever. So let's get started brewing this compost tea. Right here I have my sophisticated measuring device. I'm going to go ahead and add the brown sugar. The brown sugar is added at half the weight of my compost material. So I'm putting about 4 pounds of compost, which means I need 2 pounds of sugar. So here's my second pound. Go ahead and add my rice vinegar. Now this line right there is 24 ounces. So I'm going to go ahead and just add 24 ounces brown rice vinegar. I'm going to do my fermented plant juice. Go ahead and add 24 ounces of fermented plant juice. Here I've got my organic humic acid. This is from a company called GS Plant Foods. I really recommend using them. Great product. Next ingredient is 5 gallons of seawater. A little messy there. The final ingredient to this is the most important. It's my compost, or IMO 4 in this case. Now this IMO 4 is made up of really fine dirt, and because this is an aerated compost tea, I want every bit of this to be aerated. There can be a clump that is created in the middle of this that can become anaerobic, and we don't want to brew the anaerobic microbes. We want to propagate the aerobic microbes. I'm actually going to take one of my air stones and put it inside of this bag. And I'm going to bury it down in there in the material. And then tie this bag up over the top. I'm just using a nut milk bag. It's a pretty fine mesh nylon material, and it's perfect for keeping out all the big chunks. Because remember, I'm actually going to be putting this in a sprayer, and in the sprayer I don't want my nozzles to be gunked up and things like that. So I actually want this material to be fairly clean still.
So I wanted to take a moment and explain a few more things to you guys, answer a few questions that you might have. These are things I came across in the process of learning how to make and apply compost tea, so here we go. So you just watched me make a 100-gallon batch of compost tea. I'm going to try to link a Google Sheet document that will allow you to input the square footage or the acreage that you're going to be covering with compost tea, and it should spit out all the numbers that you need to know for the ratios for the right recipe, and making sure that you have the right amount for whatever area that you're covering. A 5-gallon batch for me generally will cover about 6,000 square feet. Also, for Korean natural farming, this liquid IMO or compost tea is actually missing an ingredient, and that ingredient that we're missing is called OHN, stands for Oriental Herbal Nutrient. The reason I don't have it is because it's difficult to make, and I didn't have enough for this particular batch. It's okay, it's an anti-pathogenic boost, if you will, that gives a positive direction to your compost tea and other Korean natural farming inputs. So we are brewing this without Oriental Herbal Nutrient, but also I want that to be a lesson that it's okay if you don't have all the ingredients. Together, everything works really well. If you're missing one or two things, it's still better than nothing. So I encourage you to press forward even if you don't have all the ingredients. So I want to talk about application really quick. The compost tea has a few things in it. It has some nutrients, it has some hormones, it has some acids, the humic acid that we put in there. All of these things are going to be good for the plants that we're spraying them on. Mostly what we're concerned about here is spreading the biology that's in the liquid. So we have to be concerned about the life of that biology, making sure that we're not putting them in a bad environment so they won't survive as soon as we put them out, and also making sure that as we're applying them, we're not going to be damaging them. So what that means is when you're applying this, especially if you're using a sprayer, a large sprayer or a small sprayer, doesn't matter. If you're using a sprayer, you want to keep the PSI at 20 PSI or lower. Now on those little pump up sprayers, that's kind of hard to do. It's difficult to tell how much PSI is in the line, but you're going to want to keep it pretty low. And the reason is if it's too high pressure, you can actually damage the organisms that we're trying to spread out before you put them on the plants. We don't want to do that. On a larger sprayer like the one that I have, or the one that you saw in this video where my neighbor was spraying on his pasture, there's usually a pressure gauge. If you can, keep it below 20 PSI, and that is, according to Dr. Elaine Ingham, that's a reasonable range to keep them in, so that way they're not going to die. So the key is that we're wanting to spray this at a cool time of day, not in direct sunlight. If it's a really cloudy day and cooler, maybe in the spring or the fall season, of course you can spread it in the middle of the day and it will be fine. However, I prefer to spray it later in the day. Like I mentioned, the stomata is open. It's going to accept everything that we're putting on it very well. Also, it's going to have whatever the nighttime hourly range is. It's going to have the whole nighttime. And when I say it, I mean the compost tea and the biology in the compost tea. It's going to have all night to establish and find a home to where it'll be safe from high temperatures or lack of water, things like that. I want to hit on the ingredients of this compost tea and tell you a little bit about why each one is important, and also share with you the function of each ingredient. So, of course, let's start with the compost. The compost is our base material that has the microbiology in it that we're hoping to expand and propagate. Very important, obviously. You can use, like we say in Korean natural farming, IMO. Totally fine. You can use IMO 2, 3, or 4. You can use a good compost. If you learn from Dr. Elaine Ingham, she teaches how to make amazing compost, and they're also looking for the same, they call them AMF, or arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. We're looking for the same thing here. And you can also use vermicompost. All of those things accomplish the same thing. They have the initial inoculum of microbiology that we're wanting to propagate in the water column, so that way we can spread it. Now I want to talk about the humic acid. You can use humic acid or vermihumic acid. If you use the vermihumic acid, it's not as strong as the mined leonardite humic acid is. So you're going to want to use that at a higher concentration ratio, meaning we're going to put maybe 1 to 500 of the leonardite humic acid, but we're going to be putting 1 to 250 of the vermihumic acid. So fermented plant juice is not something that you've learned from me quite yet. I do have a video coming out on that very soon. Fermented plant juice is where we take a vigorous plant nearby in our local area, hopefully, and we capture the nutrients and the vigor through the hormones of that plant through fermenting the plant material. The result of this fermentation is a stable liquid form of nutrients. In compost tea, that acts as our catalyst, as you might have heard in some other videos or other resources. That will help feed the microbiology that we're introducing through our compost. So the brown rice vinegar will obviously bring an acidic component to the compost tea. If you can think about the succession of soil, it goes from, let's say, desert, high desert, prairie, shrubs, forest, and then old growth forest. It sort of moves in that direction. As you move towards the old growth forest, which is the highest level of succession for the soil and for the plants, it's more and more and more acidic. So what we're doing is we are looking for our Bosquito mycorrhizal fungi in our compost tea, and we're going to buffer our whole compost tea by adding an acidic component, the brown rice vinegar, to help navigate the compost tea to be more beneficial for the mycorrhizal fungi and those beneficial microbes that survive in those more acidic environments. So one of the interesting components of this compost tea is the seawater. I actually went to the coast and I gathered seawater so I could use in my compost tea. If you have access to seawater, I would suggest getting some seawater from just under the surface, maybe within the first 2 or 3 feet of the surface. Right under the surface, you're going to have a little bit cleaner water in the first place. Any kind of debris or oils will float on top of the water, and then just under that you'll have some clean water. What we're looking for here is a high concentration of minerals, trace minerals, and that's going to be found in the seawater. We're also adding a salt component. If you can think about the human body, we need sodium to be able to function correctly, and so do these microorganisms that we're looking for. Think about it like someone playing a sports game and they're getting really exhausted. It's hot, they're sweating a lot, and in comes Gatorade. What does Gatorade have? Well, it has some sugars and some other things, but it has a lot of electrolytes in the form of sodium. So bringing those electrolytes in through seawater, adding that salt component, is going to give the microbiology the best chance to survive and thrive in these crazy conditions that we're going to give them when we spread them on our field, crop, or wherever we're putting them. If you don't have access to seawater, that is totally fine. You can make your own seawater with 30 grams of salt, sea salt preferably, 30 grams of sea salt per 1 gallon of water, and you use that at a ratio of 1 to 20 for whatever amount of compost tea you're making. So the 1 to 20 ratio for 100 gallons of compost tea, which I made in this video, comes out to 5 gallons of seawater. For whatever amount you're making, 30 grams of sea salt per 1 gallon of seawater that you would need. Now that I've described all the ingredients and their main purpose, I did talk a little bit about the ratios, but here I wanted to make sure that you can see the ratios. Pause it right here, write them down. They're also going to be on that Google Sheet document that I have linked in the description below. Please go take a look at that, input how much square footage you're trying to cover. It's going to spit out with the correct ratios the quantities of each ingredient that you're going to need. I tried also to list all of the ingredients that you can purchase and where you can purchase them in the description. So go check those out. If you don't have access to something, you can leave a comment and I'll try to direct you to where you can find the proper ingredient. probably the most important thing you can think about when you're spraying this compost tea is making sure that as soon as you're done aerating it, you get it on the plants as soon as possible. And what I mean by that is, as we're aerating this using a fish tank aerator or some other kind of aerator that you can find, as we're aerating this, we are introducing oxygen and oxygenating the water. And the reason we're doing that is because we want the aerobic microbes to be the ones thriving and propagating. If we take this off of our oxygen because we're ready to spray it at 24, 36 hours, whatever your climate allows you to do, if we take it off the oxygen, we have a 4-hour window to put it on the ground. So as you're planning to make this compost tea, make sure that the time that it's going to take you to brew lines up with the time of day that you want to spray it. We do not want to finish brewing this at 10 in the morning and then put it in our spray container and wait until 8 at night to spray this. That is not a good idea. You're going to kill the aerobic microbes, and the anaerobic microbes will start to rise up and really take over, and then you're not going to be spraying the best stuff on your ground that you could. So please take that. That is probably the most important piece of the puzzle here, is when you're done brewing, you need to spray it as soon as possible. You need to spray it as soon as possible and get it on the plants and the ground at the right time of day. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate every single one of you. Please leave a comment if you have any questions. Consider subscribing. I'm going to be putting out more and more videos about natural farming as you guys allow me to. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.